IVM.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ivmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey.
All parents want what's best for their children. In the patriarchal system that still defines our lives to a large extent, the gender and sexual identities of children is never inconsequential. As much as we want to, providing support to our kids isn't always easy, especially if you're the parent of a queer kid or an LGBTQIA plus child. In many ways, they are no different from their peers, but these youth face a lot of unique challenges that parents are often very unprepared for. In this episode, Meghna and I tackle the question of raising healthy and happy queer kids and why it is important for us to navigate this process of their coming out of the closet and giving them a lot of support through their childhood as well as their adulthood to navigate the situation. Almost every job in the world requires training, except parenting.
You need to learn parenting on the job, and that can be really hard.
Here on Big Talk About Tiny Humans, we want to help you navigate the world of parenting better and make your lives a little bit easier.
Hi, I'm Meghna.
And hi, I'm Devishobha.
Every week, we bring you the best research on parenting,
Top tips from experts,
and actionable strategies to confront the numerous challenges that all parents and educators face.
So let's get started, shall we? LGBTQ rights in India have been evolving rapidly in recent years. Despite strong political movements in favor of LGBTQ rights, there remains a significant amount of homophobia present among the Indian population, not only among the Indians, but all over the world. What can we as parents do about this? Join us as we discuss the most important and common refrains of parents from queer families, what it takes to raise a queer child, and how we can strengthen the ecosystem to support the LGBTQ community. Hi, Meghna. How have you been? How has your week been so far?
Hi, Shobha. My week has been very, very busy, but absolutely enjoying everything. How are things with you?
Things are okay. Things are great. The last week was Women's Day, and we had a blast talking about the Break the Bias, the movement. And I posted some very good reels on my Instagram. We got some very great feedback. I also did a Surya Namaskar.
I saw that. I loved it.
Yeah, I really loved it. I didn't think it would come out so well, but it was really enjoyable.
I've never done a Surya Namaskar in a sari, so that's really something on my bucket list.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of my friends also loved it apparently, and I really loved all the feedback. So that was great for IWD week. And so this week, I'm really excited to talk to you about this very special topic about, raising queer kids and how families can actually strengthen their ecosystem around raising these kids, helping them be normal and happy and healthy. As a clinical psychologist and a therapist, I'm sure you've seen a lot of parents coming to you with concerns and questions about children who, display certain, queer characteristics. I would like to know from you, what are the common refrains and most common, questions and concerns you hear from them, from these families, and what is your take on that?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question to begin with, because up until just a few years back, there were very, very few families coming in with these concerns, because there is so much of shame and stigma associated with the queer community that parents most often, would bring in their child and say, my child is gay, fix him, right? And most of them, as I said, would not even turn up, right? So it's actually very unfortunate. In the last few years, of course, the trend is changing. And I think there's been more awareness, more education around the LGBTQ plus IA issues. And so therefore, we see more people coming out, as well as more parents also, knocking at our door to figure out what is this all about. But, before they find their way to my office, there have been several blow-ups. There is usually disbelief. It's usually followed by anger and hurtful remarks hurtle at each other. And this is very, very common, right? In a lot of cases, there's manipulation on part of parents. In some other cases, there is shaming. There is also some threatening, right? So when the parents come, right, most of them, rather all of them who come to therapy, they come with certain basic questions which actually expose the kind of myths and misconceptions they carry around queer issues. And most often the question is, how did my son become gay, right? What causes homosexuality? And to this question, I usually ask them another question. I ask them, have you ever wondered how did you become heterosexual, right? Or suppose they have a straight child in their family. How did they become, how did your heterosexual daughter become so? So, what we need to realize is that homosexuality, any kind of sexual identity, gender identity, is not a choice. It is not caused by something, right? It is not caused by your parenting. It is not caused by early childhood experiences. It's not caused by, parents' own sexual orientation. There are still a number of people who believe that homosexual activity is unnatural. And they say that, what, this is not natural. This is not how God intended it to be. This is not how nature intended it to be. And they say that, see, sexual activity should be between a man and a woman because it's meant for procreation. It's meant for having kids, right? And to that, I usually say that there is scientific evidence that shows that homosexuality is normal and it's a natural variation in human sexuality. In fact, homosexual behavior has been recorded in many non-human animal species as well, right? And when it comes to procreation or producing kids, that is only one aspect of sexual activity, right?
Right.
There are other important aspects of sexual activity, feelings of pleasure, feelings of satisfaction. What about that? It's not like every time you have sex, you want to produce kids, right?
Right.
So, so these are the many arguments that, of course, the reactions are, of course, there are several blow-ups. There's anger, disappointment, and threatening and shaming. But these are some of the questions that parents sort of come in with.
Right. Thanks for explaining that so beautifully, Meghna. I also would like to mention that there are several instances and records of homosexuality being accepted in even ancient Hindu culture. I talk about Hindu culture because we belong to this culture. And there are several other instances of, records of such, behavior and people in other ancient cultures like the Egyptian and the Greek culture, where they have records of this. And it was perfectly acceptable because just like, statistics shows that there is normal and there is variation and you have to expect those variations. It's perfectly normal to find, people who have different orientations. It doesn't mean anything is wrong with them, right?
So that's very interesting, actually, Shobha, because you said that variations are important. Another thing that people say, the argument that they put forth, if everyone was gay, if everyone was homosexual, then humanity would cease to exist, right?
Right.
So to that, the counter argument is, firstly, everyone can never be the same. Okay.
Right.
Where humanity exists, there will always be variation. As you were saying, there will always be diversity.
Yes.
And secondly, just like heterosexuals, gay people also can and do have children, right? They can adopt, they can have through surrogates, through donors, right? There's no evidence that homosexuality harms the very moral fabric of society. I mean, if you look at the countries of the world today, there are 31 countries where gay marriages, where homosexual marriages are legal. And these are the countries which are functioning smoothly, they're functioning well. So it is the mark of a very mature society to accommodate and accept diversity.
Yes, absolutely. On this note, guys, let's take a short break and stay with us as we discuss questions about the acceptance of queer kids, the challenges faced by queer kids and their parents and families, and further strategies to raise happy queer kids.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Advertising is Dead, Varun talks to Naveen Murali. He is the head and VP of Marketing at Pepperfry, and together they trace the evolution of the furniture market in India. On Marathi Kirkitun, the Deshmukhs welcome Sania Mane, host of our new Marathi podcast, Akhand Bharat. She shares how she conceptualized the podcast and the story behind presenting history in this way. On Tere Mere Raste, Keshav takes us to a land of unique traditions, Mathi. Find out how they use auspicious occasions to plant trees. On Pulyabazi, Pranay and Saurabh analyze India's current need of the hour, self-reliance or self-interest. And on Smarter with Sid, Siddharth shares 2 important lessons we can learn from the infamous Oscars incident involving Will Smith, Chris Rock, and, well, a joke and a punch. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Also, don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening to us on, including the one you're listening to us on now. And also, please do check us out on YouTube. We have a number of channels. They're all available on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. We're also doing a small listener survey to help us understand you, the listener, better, and how you like our shows, how you respond to the advertising, and so on. We'd really appreciate it if you could spare a few minutes to fill it out. It's at ivmpodcast.com/survey. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week, SBI Life Insurance, India Water Portal, and Jupiter, a digital banking app. Thank you so much for making this possible.
So welcome back, folks. We had a short break and now we are back talking about raising happy and healthy queer kids. And Meghna is talking to us about what she sees in therapy about parents coming out with their queer kids for help. And we're going to be covering topics like how can parents, help their children, strategies to raise their children happily, give them good mental health and physical health. And one of the most important moments and important rites of passage in this whole process is the way that parents react to their child's coming out rite of passage. So, Meghna, I would like to ask you, what are your recommendations for parents navigating this very, very important and very emotional process of their child coming out and revealing to their parent about their queerness?
Right. So, of course, it's difficult to say the least, right? I mean, there's a firestorm of conflicting emotions that you experience when your child comes out of the closet, and that's very understandable. How you can process this emotional storm and how you can respond to your child in a rational and sorted manner, the best way is by planning a respectful discussion with your child, right? Of course, understanding that shouting and blaming will not help. It will only create resentment between you and your child. Even if you've had several blow-ups, even if you've spoken words, hurtful words, threatened, made hurtful actions, even if you've done all that, and that's again completely understandable. It's important that at this juncture that you request your child for an opportunity to start over on a different footing, right? So, because think about your goal here. Your goal here is not to create more distance between you and your child. Yeah. Your goal is to get closer to your child because,
Meghna, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm a little curious. You said that, parents need to plan for a respectful discussion with their children. But I am assuming part of the problem is that parents are totally clueless, and sometimes it just comes as a surprise to them, right? When the child wants to come out and say that, this is what they are and expect the parent to understand, but it just doesn't happen. So how can the parent plan for it when they don't know what is happening with their child or what is different about their child?
So think about your goal here, right? Your goal is to not create more distance between you and your child. Your goal is to get closer to your child. If your child is looking at you as her adversary, right? She is not going to listen to you. He or she, they are not going to listen to you, right? So what can you do? The thing I referred to earlier, having a respectful discussion, planning a respectful discussion, remember that before you do that, there's another step, right? You have to ask yourself certain questions before you plan a respectful discussion with your child. What are these questions? Do I understand, without judgment, do I understand what my child is saying? Do I understand what they are going through? Right? Do I even understand what, whatever they're saying about their gender or sexual identity? Do I even understand that? Like, objectively, do I understand that? Is it about my beliefs or is it about my fear for my child's future? Or is it about both? Right? There are 2 more questions you need to ask yourself before you even plan a respectful discussion with your child. The second question is, my partner and I, are we on the same page? Right? Can we even begin to tackle the situation, if you're not on the same page, if we're not united in our approach? Right? Are we, for example, my partner is blaming me, spousal blame is very, very common. Is my spouse blaming me? Am I blaming my spouse? Am I blaming myself? Self-blame is also very common because for parents who don't understand what a different sexual or gender identity can be, They can, ascribe many different reasons. Like some of them might say ki, "Arey, ye to, because of the influence of their friends, he's behaving like this," and all kinds of reasons, right?
Right.
And the third question you need to ask yourself is, do I need support? Could I talk to someone in my family? Could I speak to a therapist? Could I speak to somebody in my friend circle who will be non judgmental, who will be informed enough, and who will be understanding enough? And if there's nobody in my circle, as I said, you can look for professional help. So before you plan a discussion with your child, it is super important that you ask yourself these questions. Now, coming to the actual discussion with your child, right? Once your initial shock and anger have subsided, it's a good idea to initiate a series of ongoing discussions with your child with an aim of understanding them better. So there are certain questions. There are three questions you can ask your child as well. One, what led you to believe that you are, for example, gay or trans or whatever, bi or whatever?
Right.
When did you first become aware of, your gender or your sexual identity? Have you ever experienced, for example, attraction? If they're saying they're homosexual, have you ever experienced attraction towards the opposite sex? If they're saying that they are, if their sex is that of a boy but they feel like a girl, when did you start feeling like that first? So basically the idea is that you are trying to understand, right, your child without judgment. And while I understand that that can be a very difficult thing to do,
Right.
but that is why I said your own asking questions of your own on your own is super important. Okay.
Right.
So the second question would be, because coming out is a very difficult process. Your child would have likely spent weeks and years in understanding themselves. Why am I different? Why am I feeling? Why am I not acting like my peers my age? Right? They would have gone through their whole years of self-doubt, perhaps even blame, perhaps confusion. It's not been easy.
And
Coming
also
out to
preparing for the
themselves.
coming out, right?
Preparing for the
for
coming out.
telling
In
them.
fact, coming out is a 3-step process. The first step of that is coming out to themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
And themselves not being. So by the time they end up coming out to you, which is the second step, it's not like they're faffing.
Right.
It's not a phase, right? They have gone through years of turmoil before coming out to you.
Right.
So an understanding and a sensible and a respectful question to ask is, have you talked about this with anyone else?
Right.
To your friends, to your teachers, any coach? And have you been ever ridiculed? Have you been ever discriminated against? Have you been ever bullied for your, gender or sexual identity? That's a very important question, because you obviously would want to stand up for your child.
Yes.
Right? Whether you agree with them, whatever they're saying, I mean, it's not really your choice, but even so, whether you agree with what they're saying and understand and accept what they're saying or not, you want to stand up for your child, right? And the third most important question is, are you comfortable with your identity? Do you accept it yourself? Or, because as I said, coming out is not a one-time process. As your child gets more comfortable with their gender or sexual identity, they will disclose it to more people. They may inch closer to self-acknowledgement and self-acceptance, but it's not easy. It's never easy. So this is the way any parent can navigate their child coming out to them.
Right. Awesome. And so what, I'm just curious. So have you ever encountered any cases where the parent has come to you suspecting that there is, their child is struggling to come out, and you have advised them to be forthcoming about this entire thing and help their child come out? Have you also seen something like that?
No, not yet. I hope we reach that level of understanding by the parents that, they're like, oh, I think I suspect this, but you know what? I want to help. I mean, that's another level of acceptance and understanding. And I wish to see such parents in my therapy practice, but not yet, unfortunately.
That'd be nice. Yeah. Right. And Meghna, I just want to understand, raising a happy and healthy queer child can be particularly challenging. I mean, parenting itself is quite hard. And I mean, try as we might, we all make mistakes as parents, but for a particularly challenging thing like, keeping the queer child happy, in the sense, taking care of the mental health, because notwithstanding the fact that they are trying to reconcile with the fact that they are different to themselves and to you as parents and family, they are also facing a lot of pressure outside of family, outside of home.
Absolutely.
And they are, I mean, the kind of mental pressure and the mental turmoil that they undergo is something that is huge. And it can really pain a parent when they come to know what the child is going through, right? And a lot of times a parent can feel, why didn't they come out to me earlier? I could have, I could have done something. So what are your tips that you can recommend to, give a normal childhood to queer children as parents and family?
I think that's a very good question. But while I feel that's a very good question, a question that all of us should ask ourselves, parents who are raising queer kids definitely should. But I also think that so much has happened that already by the time parents even accept that, my child is queer, that there's a lot of back and forth that goes on, right? So I think the first thing that I would like to say is keep your empathy always going, right? Because there will be times when the societal pressure will get to you. There will be times, there will be moments when you will be filled with, guilt, doubt. You may oscillate between hope, hopelessness. In fact, there's this whole term called ambiguous loss, Shobha. You know what that means? That means that, you're almost like mourning the loss of a person who's alive. And ambiguous loss is very, very common amongst parents of queer kids when they come out to them, like the grief that you experience, right? The sadness that you experience when you realize, when you get to know that your child is queer, is almost as intense as experiencing like a death, right?
Interestingly, this is also very common among partners who have been cheated upon.
Right, exactly. So, and in ambiguous loss, typically you oscillate between hope and hopelessness, because so there is still some part of you which is saying that, oh, you know what, my child may be completely okay, my child may be normal, right? And because your definition of normal is pretty narrow, right, in that sense. So I would like to rephrase the word normal, and I would like to say that you can still give them a childhood which accepts their normality as your own. You know what I mean, right? So your normal is not their normal. Their normal should become your normal. And the first step to doing that is keeping your empathy going, putting yourself in your child's shoes, imagining what it must be like for them to not only disclose their gender or sexual identity to you, but also to having been through that entire process of figuring out who I am and why am I this way. It's not been easy for them, right? And it's having been raised in a society that is either ignorant or very openly hostile towards queer kids and queer people.
And abusive too, sometimes.
And abusive too. Like, it must have been very confusing, very scary to realize that, like, I don't feel attracted, for example, unlike my peers, to the opposite sex. Or I'm in a girl's body, but I feel like a man, for example. Right. So, and as you said, your child may have already been exposed to discrimination, abuse, ridicule. For example, a very common myth is that homosexual boys and men are girly. And that's a complete myth. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's not true, right? It's so things like that, right? So, and that is why a lot of these kids and teens, they suppress their feelings because they want to fit in. They don't want to upset their parents. They want to meet societal expectations. But this actually puts them at risk of experiencing depression, anxiety, suicide. I can't tell you how high is the rate of suicide amongst the LGBTQ+IA population, right? So even, and this is a strong message going out to parents who have trouble accepting their child's gender or sexual identity, that you don't have to accept your child's identity before you begin to start empathizing with them. So empathetic lens, always remember, what would be helpful when your child does come out to you and even later is to say things like, it must have been quite difficult for you to say this to us, but we're glad that you shared this with us. We'd rather know what you're going through than you hiding or suppressing it in a way, right? Yourself, right? So we want to be there for you no matter what. So continuing to express your love, continuing to express your support, even if you're yourself not quite sure how to process your feelings, even if you disagree with your child, you have to remember that your child will continue to require support. Okay, so keep your empathy going. So the first strategy is looking at this from an empathetic lens. The second strategy is an educative lens, right? Educate yourself. If you don't know something, read up about it. There are many, many resources. There are books, there are podcasts, there are movies, there are journal studies. There is tons of stuff that you can read. Educate yourself. There are many words and phrases used about and within the LGBTQIA plus community, which you probably don't understand, and it's okay. So read up, because doing so will help sensitize you. It will facilitate clearer discussions with your child. It could actually also help you empathize. And it's super important that you connect with parents of other children who identify as being queer and form support groups. This, Shobha, is one of the most effective strategies of dealing with, your child, not only your child coming out to you, but also raising, as you mentioned, raising a happy and healthy queer child. In that support group, those support groups are composed of parents whose children have come out to them years back. And it's all about their struggles and their stories and their journeys of acceptance. And it's beautiful because it is in those groups that you also are able to challenge your own homophobic beliefs, for example. Where are my beliefs coming from? Where does the idea that heterosexuality, for example, is normal and pure, where does this idea come from? And you'll realize that, so question. So educative lens means also to question that, why do I think that only, a girl should be a certain way, a boy who I define as a boy should be a certain way, who can marry whom, where? So you will realize that when you start asking these questions, which we are never taught to ask, by the way, our beliefs about what is normal and what is good and what is appropriate come from society. Right. And society wants to control our sexuality. Society wants to govern, what we do, our actions, everything, right? So if a parent says that, I'm struggling with this because this is what I've been taught my whole life, they can be helped to see that society in these groups, in these support groups that I'm talking about, they can be helped to see that society actually teaches that something like a homosexuality is wrong and bad for a reason. And if the parent is able to see that, a lot of this morality and shame around, say, homosexuality can drop. Right? So educative lens is super important because then you won't just dismiss it as just a phase in your child or an illness to make it worse. Right? So that's the second thing. So the first thing was an empathetic lens. The second thing is an educational lens. And finally, coming to an emotive lens. And emotive lens is important because a lot of, in fact, most of the parents who struggle with their children coming out or raising a queer child, they basically say one thing, that how does my religion, I cannot accept this because my religion doesn't accept this, my God doesn't accept this. And so from an emotive lens, it can be helpful for the parent to examine how in my religion, like in other religions also, there are many teachings about respect, dignity, about universal love, about the fact that all creations are by the same God. So how is it that some creations are okay and some are not?
Yes.
Right. In fact, I would like to narrate it's a sweet little anecdote of this mother who was a devout Catholic mother. And this I'm taking from, an anonymous participant in one of these research groups, in fact, one of these support groups. Right. And she said that while I love my daughter who told me she's a lesbian, my biggest difficulty was that my God doesn't accept this. So she took this to her priest. And you know what a priest told her? Who your daughter is between her and her God. It's not for you to worry about. See, you have your faith and you have nothing to do with your daughter's sexuality. You don't have to worry about whether Jesus accepts her. That's between them. And so she came back to the support group and she explained how this response helped her resolve her difficulty, because then she was assured that I don't have to change anything about my relationship with my God. I can continue to have my own relationship with my God, right?
Absolutely. Also helps with complete acceptance, because now it's anyway out of your hands, and you know that, there is the only thing that is in your control is complete acceptance and your reaction to it. So that's a beautiful response.
Yeah, so that's basically an emotive lens, right? Because when it comes to religion and when it comes to our deeply held beliefs, it's all about what we feel, right? It's all about our emotions. Right. So the answer also has to come from our emotions. Right. So I think the last thing that I would like to mention here in the emotive lens is that I think a lot of people look at homosexuality or queerness as a morality issue. Right. Whereas if you look at it as a morality issue, you will fail. You will definitely fail, because the answer will be, sorry, this is immoral. That's the answer you'll get. So I would urge parents to look at it as a human rights issue, because only then can you have an empathetic outlook towards your child. Only then can you stand up for your child. When they're teased, when they're mistreated, only then can you empower your child to deal with all this discrimination and teasing and bullying that they might be facing. Right. So looking at things from an emotive lens is also super important. Okay, so to summarize, I've talked about 3 ways or 3 lenses through which you can view this, your parenting journey, parenting a queer child: an empathetic lens, an educative lens, and an emotive lens. So it becomes a triple E, empathetic, educative, and emotive, right? It's a triple E in raising a child who identifies as being queer. So that's our episode for today. Thank you for listening to Big Talk About Tiny Humans, our podcast for parents and educators.
Hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to share it with your friends and family.
Listen and subscribe to Big Talk About Tiny Humans on the IVM Podcasts app, website, and all major audio platforms. We are available everywhere.
You can follow us on social media and online. Meghna is at The Therapist Mommy on Instagram and YouTube. And you can check out her website, raisingfamilyacademy.com, for a transformative course on raising a child with emotional intelligence.
And Devishobha is at KidsKintha on Twitter and Instagram. And check out kidskintha.com for in-depth articles and events on parenting and child development.
While you're at it, do also check out other great shows from the IVM Podcasts network at shows.ivmpodcasts.com. And IVM is on social media at IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
We'll catch you again on our next episode.
Ladies, I'm sure you will relate to it if I say that we are constantly busy with work, studies, cooking, and what not. And amidst all of this, we often forget an important element that needs our desperate attention: finance. So here we are, bringing to you SBI Life Presents A Sip of Finance, a women-exclusive podcast where we will teach you how to manage personal finances in a simple and straightforward way with your host, Priyanka Acharya, a finance expert who's been in the industry for 14 plus years. And not just in English, but in 7 more languages. So tune in every Tuesday for fresh episodes on the IVM Podcast Network and all major podcast streaming platforms.
Habits? Routines? How exactly do they help us get better? Well, to simplify it for you, tune in to the Habit Coach podcast. I am Ashton Doctor, and I'm going to be here to help you get better daily with some simple, easy to do habits that you can easily adapt to your life. So tune in to the Habit Coach podcast from Monday to Friday, because I believe that awesome lives start with awesome habits.